Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about The Land Before Time 3, The Time of Great Giving. Roy Allen Smith returns to direct after the last film, and you have a returning cast of people like Scott McAfee as Littlefoot, Candace Hutson as Sarah, Heather Hogan as Ducky, Rob Paulson as Spike, and then you have tons of other people in here like John Ingle, Linda Gary, and many, many more. What's going on, everybody? I want to welcome you for stopping by for another installment of the Land Before Time series that I'm doing here on my channel, covering all 14 films. If you're just now hopping on, the only films that I ever saw in this series were the original film, the second one, and I felt like over the course of time I may have seen sprinklings of others. But yeah, going into this series, a lot of this is going to be brand new to me, and the reason I wanted to do this series at all is because I have a lot of fond memories of that first film. I knew there was a couple more installments, but I was shocked to find out that there were 14 installments in this series, because again, I think I saw maybe the second, the third, the fourth at some point in my life, but the only real ones I remembered was the first one and the second one. And I'm happy to say this time around I enjoyed this one. Not nearly as much as the charming classic, the original film, but definitely a lot more than the last film, which was also directed by Roy Allen Smith. And of course, I want to say a big thanks to my guests for joining me here in this video, and that is my buddy Mike of the channel Did You See That? I'm sure you guys already know who he is because his face has graced this screen many, many times here on this channel. But if you're not familiar with my buddy, he covers all things movies, he does some TV, he does weekly live stream. He also does different things like vlogs and unboxing videos, and he's easily the biggest Back to the Future fan I've ever met in my life, so you can expect a lot of great Back to the Future content over on his channel. But we're going to be hearing from him in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on this movie. And this one for me was definitely more memorable than the last one. Similar to the last one, there are some elements that are definitely huge steps down in terms of just filmmaking and story, character moments, and all different things like that in comparison to the first one. The first one is a charming film of its time with dated elements, but has a charm to its 2D animation. The score was really, really great in that film, and you have a really interesting character development story that's told over the course of the movie. And when it comes to the second one, it felt more like a run-of-the-mill, straight to VHS movie that followed up a successful film, and of course lost a lot of the iconic names that were behind the first film, like George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Kathleen Kennedy, just to name a few of the people who were producing that film. And so in the case of these sequels now, we're moving further and further away from the charm of that original film, but I'm kind of happy to say that this one I felt retained it a little bit more so than the last one. The base premise here is that everybody in the Great Valley, where they, fought to get to at the end of the first film, and spent the entire adventure of the second film, everybody is now really worried because their water supply has been cut off. And the kids, Littlefoot, Ducky, Spike, and the rest of the gang have to work together to try to figure out why there is no water coming to the Great Valley or the area that they're in. Over the course of the film, there's some generic bad guys, a trio of bullies that they have to deal with, some velociraptors, and some other obstacles. But overall, yeah, this is an enjoyable watch. It's a very silly, made-for-kids movie. I think if you, grew up watching The Land Before Time, or maybe saw a couple of these like I did when I was a child, and kind of just want to go back and revisit it, or maybe you're just a fan of 90s cartoons for kids because that's the kind of stuff you grew up on, then I think there's a lot to be enjoyed here. This isn't by any means a top-tier 90s animated film, especially when it comes to 2D animation and the iconic films we would get of that era, but I thought that this was a good time, and maybe it's because my expectations were brought down so much from the first to the second, but yeah, I found this to be a cute, good time. And that's the best way I can describe this movie, a cute, fun time. It's not the greatest movie of all time by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, but I had a lot of fun going back and revisiting this movie. When the movie started, I thought to myself, okay, this seems familiar. I didn't remember the story or how it was going to play out, but there were elements and visuals that seemed nostalgic to me and kind of were bringing up some old memories of just moments of maybe catching it on TV, which did make me feel like a kid again, which I do feel kind of enhanced my experience. Overall, I think you have better animation here than in the last film, which thank God. I thought that the last film just had that straight to VHS kind of feel and vibe when it comes from an iconic film to a straight-to-video sequel that ended up with never being as good as the original. And I thought that this one stepped it up just a little bit. Not as charming as that original animation, but definitely a lot better than the last movie. And overall, I enjoyed the story here a lot more. The base premise, like I said, is that there's no water in Great Valley anymore, and they have to figure out what they're gonna do. And what's interesting this time around is the kids are the ones that really have their heads on their shoulders right now. They have a good head on their shoulders, whereas all the adults are the ones that are acting out and acting irrationally, going crazy, trying to, take water from themselves, not care about others. And it turns into this whole thing where there's control and manipulation and people being rude to one another. And the overall message at the end of the film is this idea of community and having to work together and trust in one another to be able to actually come out the other end of this. And it's interesting because this time around, the kids really aren't the ones who learn the lessons. It's the adults. It's Littlefoot's grandparents and specifically Sarah's father, who is the absolute asshole of this movie. In the last couple reviews, Mike and I have been very vocal about the fact that Sarah, the Triceratops young yellow girl who is hanging out with Littlefoot and the rest of the gang, has been just a flat out bitch. She's a horrible, horrible character. And I was really worried that over the course of the films that she'd become somebody like Ashley Tisdale's Sharpay in the High School Musical movies, where you have this one central character that's consistently showing up and that is essentially a villain to our core characters, but she's still part of the main set of characters, and she's always doing things to belittle or kind of get above everybody else. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when she looks like an asshole, Littlefoot and the rest of the gang accept her, bring her in, say, hey, why don't you come and have a good time with us? Because they feel bad for her when she's alone at the end of the day. And then the next movie, she just decides to be a bitch again. We saw that with Sharpay in the High School Musical movies, and there's a lot of other movies that have stuff like that. I don't know, that's just one random example that pops to my mind. And I was worried that that was going to be the same case, and I'm happy to say here that Sarah actually was far more enjoyable. There were moments where her dad didn't want her to spend time with the other kids like they did in the previous films, and sometimes she would have joined her dad in being an asshole. But in the case of this movie, there were times where she disagreed with her dad and wanted to be with her friends and is building a connection with them, which for me was nice to see, because I feel like now 3 movies in, there is some character development and some character growth, and you do feel like these young kids have all grown to enjoy each other a lot more over the course of these 3 movies, even if these films aren't rich with character development and a deep narrative. Now, I do have some negatives and some things I wasn't crazy about on this film, but I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor to my buddy Mike from Did You See That, and we'll get back to my thoughts in just a moment.
Anthony A. Perez, the call-up has happened once again, and this time we're talking about The Land Before Time 3, The Time of Great Giving. So, this series so far has been interesting, right? Because I've never seen the first movie, then I checked out the second one, which I wasn't huge on. The first one is definitely the best so far. And then now we've got this installment here, where Candace Hutson returns once again to voice Sarah. Roy Allen Smith comes to direct once again this time around. And after I watched this movie, I didn't go in with high hopes, because the second movie, it was okay. Me and Anthony pretty much agreed on that movie. This one, however, I feel like at times there's improvements, at times it kind of doesn't improve on the second movie. So firstly, Anthony, thank you so much for having me back onto the channel once again. Pleasure doing the series so far, and I'm really looking forward to how the future installments go. But in regards to this movie, yet again, another kind of mediocre installment. Now, don't get me wrong, I will say I like the plot of this movie, especially how it's all about this drought in the valley, and all the dinosaurs are struggling, and I really like that, because I was like, okay, well, maybe they can kind of build more of a community. We see more of a community sense as such, with all the different main leads, kind of dinosaur parents, for example. So I think that we've got like Sarah's father in here as well. We see like Ducky's parents, and we've got Littlefoot's grandparents as such as well. But so it's nice to see like all them come together and kind of see how like their different personalities kind of clash with one another. I like that element of this movie. I also again like the plot line of it. I will also say Sarah's character in here is actually less annoying than the first 2 movies, which I guess a big plus on that one. But she's still annoying. Yeah, don't get me wrong, that hasn't gone away. What I will say in this movie, what I liked about it anyway, is what I just mentioned before. And you get a little bit more character development, I guess, so I like that element of it. But ultimately, like, where this movie falls short for me, and where this kind of whole series falls short for me so far after the first movie, is the fact that our characters don't really learn anything. So, for example, we've got in here, so Sarah's father, we can clearly tell where she gets her bitchiness from, and her stupidity is from her father. Her father is just a dumb character in this movie, and especially when, towards the end of this movie, it's a bit of a spoiler here, there's like this big fire breaks out, and literally all the clans of all these animals are like, right, we've got to get to the top, avoid this fire. Sarah's father's like, no, I know what I'm doing, let's go down to the bottom. So he goes down to the bottom with Sarah. Long and behold, they're going to get bloody caught, because that's the whole point of the fire starting near the bottom. And it's like, what are you seriously doing right now? Like, I was like, this is just dumb decision making, you know? And yeah, of course, Littlefoot's grandfather has to go and save them, which he ultimately ends up doing, but it's just a dumb decision. Now, what I also didn't like about this movie is we have 3 kind of bully dinosaur characters, and I was like, none of them were likable. You know, you've got the main bully, you've got the one who didn't really want to be a bully, then you've got someone kind of going along with it for the heck of it. Yeah, you know, typical kind of trope here, you have that here as well. I didn't like those characters at all. I feel like they could have just been written out of this movie. They didn't really serve like any big purpose whatsoever. And my biggest gripe with this series so far, besides kind of the lack of the development of our characters, is I'm also not a huge fan of the musical numbers. I really don't think that they need to be in this movie. And don't get me wrong, this movie's only like 70 minutes long, so it's not exactly like a very long movie or anything like that. But I really feel like those musical numbers don't really fit in this movie, or there hasn't even been, like, for example, for me, a single memorable one to the point where I'm like, oh, right, let's go listen to that on Spotify, or let's go seek out that song once again. I don't care about them, to be honest with you. Nothing happens in those musical numbers of importance, so a lot of the time I find myself wanting to skip over them. So this installment, there's elements here that I think improve on the previous movie, but then there's elements here that still falter with the previous movie's negatives that I have, and I just really hope that they improve, but I don't really see that happening, being honest with you. So overall, another mediocre installment. Are they made for kids, these movies? Absolutely. Are kids gonna love it? Probably, yeah. But for me, and probably like Anthony, maybe not so much. So Anthony, thank you once again, man, for having me onto this installment. I'm really enjoying this series for what they are so far. It's cool getting into 3 movies. We've got plenty more to go, so hopefully from here, they keep going kind of on the up. But we'll just have to wait and see. And until the next one, I'll see you later.
A big thanks to Mike of Did You See That for joining me here for another Land Before Time video. A big thanks once again, my friend. And yeah, I loved hearing your thoughts. It looks like we're pretty similar on this movie. It seems like I enjoyed the film a little bit more than you, but you know, I do agree that this isn't an absolutely incredible film. There is a run-of-the-mill story here, there's run-of-the-mill animation, and it's definitely a movie of its time, a straight-to-video film of its time specifically, I should mention. It's a movie that's not going to work for everybody, and it's something that is definitely more for kids than adults. So I do recognize that even though I've had some positives to say on the early half of this review, it really depends who you are. My buddy Rashad of Rashadji Reviews, you know, I would never recommend this movie for him because it's not his bag. It's not something I think he would ever really enjoy. But if you are a kid of the 90s like myself, and you do enjoy the charming, cheesy cartoons of that time, there is something to enjoy here. Or if you're just an adult who does enjoy cartoons that are typically meant for kids, but you just enjoy the lighter fare, I think there is something to enjoy in this installment, especially if you've been watching the movies that led up to it. Now, I mentioned that there were some negatives I wanted to talk about, and I think the biggest ones for me really are the musical numbers. I have not been a fan of the musical numbers that have been introduced from the last one into this one, and the last one I will say had way worse musical numbers. There was a main song that the kids sang in that last film that just lyrically, melodically, it was just laughable. Like, there was nothing about it that was catchy. There was a song from the villains of the last film that was about eggs that was kind of like ironically silly, and I kind of enjoyed that one. But in this film, yeah, I found myself enjoying it a little bit more. I wasn't crazy about it, but I found myself enjoying it just a tad bit more. I liked the songs a little bit more. I found them to be a little bit more engaging and something that was a little bit more cutesy, but by no means is it a case like kind of like Mike said, where I'm going to throw them on Spotify and listen to them. My favorite on-screen musicals typically are things like The Nightmare Before Christmas or Sweeney Todd and Corpse Bride, all things that have Tim Burton involved in some way. I love those movies and I love the music of those movies, and there's plenty others, Disney movies, and I mean I could sit here and list off musicals forever, La La Land from the last few years. Those movies I will throw on my Spotify playlist and they'll be in the mix of all my rock music, heavy metal music, whatever the case may be. My playlist is super weird and will go from Slipknot to Avenged Sevenfold to Metallica to Seal to Blink-182 to Backstreet Boys, and then to a random song from The Little Mermaid or Sweeney Todd. So I love stuff like this. I do like show tunes and movies and musicals, and so yeah, you know, I'm open to musical installments in terms of this franchise moving forward. I just hope that the songs get a little bit better and it's something that's a little bit more memorable over time. Though I will say I didn't hate the songs of this movie, but I didn't love them, and I just hope that, you know, we move away from the musical element of this movie. And if we don't move away from the musical element of this movie, I just hope that if we do hone in on it a little bit more, that the songwriting just gets a little bit stronger. I'm hoping by the time we get to installment 10 that the songs are maybe something that I would throw on my Spotify playlist. Beyond that, my only real other negatives would be that the movies I feel sometimes are just so bare bones, right? But is that really a negative I can throw at this movie when this is made for clearly kids under 10 years old? This is not made for me in mind. This was not made for me in mind. Well, actually, I guess at the time it was made for me in mind, but it wasn't made for me at this age in mind. You know, it just is what it is. So I recognize that I can only criticize these movies so much, you know, but for what it is, I found it to be a silly good time with, at the end of the day, a good message. You have characters that are making dumb choices here. You have people like Sarah and her dad who aren't necessarily the brightest or the kindest at times. But overall, I found that this film had a better message and was better conveyed than the last film in terms of the idea of just working together as a community and recognizing that that's the only way that we're going to get through obstacles. Something that was interesting that kind of, you know, touched on to modern day times is, you know, when they run out of water, or it seems like they're going to be out of water soon, all of the adults start freaking out. A lot of them want to start drinking as much as they can and kind of want to take some for themselves. And there are people who want to push others away or control others. There's the manipulation element to it. And it's interesting to see how that all unfolds. And ultimately, of course, like a kid movie of this time definitely does, it leans into the idea of let's all come together and drink water as a unison and not steal too much water from anybody else and find a way to fix this. Let's move on together as a group. But it was interesting to see how the adults reacted at first, because it was very similar to what we saw in the last 2 years when COVID-19 kicked off and people were, you know, raiding stores for water and toilet paper. And just recently here in Florida, we had Hurricane Ian come in the last couple weeks ago. And yeah, you know, similar thing. All those stores were just completely raided for water and toilet paper and these different things. And it becomes a thing where there's panic, and a lot of people, specifically adults, tend to be the ones who just panic buy things to try to get what they can and not think about everybody else. And it's interesting that this movie from 1995 tackled an interesting subject matter that's very similar to what we're seeing in the world today, and definitely touches on things that humans do. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. I had a lot of fun going back and rewatching this movie. Again, I think after this, I won't be mistaken, or I won't be surprised if after this I don't remember anything else, because I couldn't tell you what happens in this series after this. This isn't a series that I really remember too much. I just remember little glimpses and certain characters that would appear, but I think at this point I've seen everything that I could have seen when I was a kid. Very well could have seen more in this franchise, and we'll see how I feel as we start to review them. But yeah, you know, this was a cute, fun time, and that's the best way I can describe it. A cute, fun time. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. So if you've seen this movie, or if you're a fan of this franchise, please leave some thoughts down below. And even if you have not seen this movie and you just like hearing me ramble, we'll leave a comment down below as well, because it helps the algorithm out and helps the channel out. I also want to welcome you guys to hit that like button, because that also helps the algorithm and the channel. And if you guys like seeing my ugly face talk about movies, please hit that subscribe button. I would definitely love to have you around as we talk about more movies here on the channel, including the rest of the installments in the Land Before Time series. And I want to say a big thanks to my guest, Mike from Did You See That, for joining me once again. The link to his channel, as usual, can be found down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you. But for now, I'll go ahead and say goodbye. Bye-bye.